And welcome to tonight's HR Analytics meetup. My name is Jeremy Shapiro, and on behalf of myself and Estelle Bouchard, our co-runner for this meetup, welcome. So just as a quick raise of hands, for how many of you is this your first time with us? Excellent. Okay, it's a lot of folks. It's very, very cool. How many of you have been here, let's say, more than 4 times? A bunch of folks in there too. Anyone who's been here since almost the beginning of those about 10 years ago too? We have a few, exactly, a few races. Is there anyone who's expecting yoga? There's actually a class, I'm not kidding, down the hallway. There's and the 10th floor is a dance studio as well. Welcome to New York City. New York City component. So because there are so many of you that are new, so the HR Analytics meetup was started about 10 years ago, and it really came from a random conversation where someone said, "Hey, we're all in New York City. We're beginning this journey of leveraging data to improve the performance of organizations and corporations. Could you introduce me to some folks?" I said, it takes a lot of time to introduce people, and I'm an introvert by nature, but I can fill out a form. And so Stella and I just started this as a meetup to kind of basically meet each other in New York City. Now, some of us are from New York City, some have traveled pretty far away. Siri, you came from Europe, not just for this as well, but as part of the book tour as well. We appreciate that in there too. So our mission is to facilitate dialogue and really try to understand what's next and how should we be thinking about leveraging data inside of our organizations today. There also is a dimension of us which is also about career and career enhancement as well too. So after the content of the meetup as well, I think Siri's going to sign some more books if you haven't had your book signed. But we'll also designate a corner as if you're looking for a career or you're seeking talent, we'll kind of buy the coats will be the area where you can go and look at that too. Many people have found employment from our meetup. I have unverified information that relationships have also occurred as well. We do not follow up on those rumors. We just allow them to sit as they are. So we do have a sponsor for today. We're very happy to thank Peter Lausch from Vimo. And so Peter, and we met each other first 15 years ago?
Yeah, 15 years
It was
ago.
probably 15 years ago. And you reminded me of something that I completely forgot. So did anyone see that movie or remember the incident where a plane landed in the Hudson River?
Yeah.
The Sully plane, Tom Hanks. You reminded me today, I almost booked that plane.
Right, we were on the
The week before.
and it was on the news, and Jeremy was. I was supposed to be on that plane, but I couldn't make it because some
Now,
beep customer
right.
called.
Now, here's the thing. I blocked it out up until 20 minutes ago when Peter reminded me of this as well. So as we're going through this, also you're reliving some trauma. As we're working through this. So Peter, would you just kind of tell us a little bit about who you are in your journey and what Vimo does?
Okay, great.
Do you want to come a little?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so cameras up. We are streaming. So if you'd like documentation, stream.
Okay, hi everyone. We're very happy to sponsor this group. This is really one of the best meetups because really meaningful content, great attendance, great repeat attendance and things like that. So it's great to be here. Vimo is a workforce planning and people analytics company, and with a big focus on what we call the predictive modeling ecosystem, really trying to predict future outcomes to help people make better decisions about their workforce. We were founded in Brooklyn. We sort of have fled far and wide since then, but it's great to be here. I read some of the book, think it's fantastic. And I think my takeaways I'm looking forward and interested to learn about is just like how as analytics professionals, we can get really involved in measuring these things which sort of hold back true success, where you need these much more structural changes. So I'm really fascinated on that angle. Hope you talk about it today. And anybody who wants to connect with us, my colleagues Kim Vierling and Chris Reese are here as well. Happy to talk to you, want to link in with you if you want to talk to us about workforce planning. People are happy to do so. So thanks again. Pleasure to sponsor the group. Thanks, Jim.
Awesome. Thank you, Peter. Very appreciated. So with that, just a couple of logistics. So we are streaming, and so there's a camera that's right here. So series we're as we're kind of sitting down in our little chat area as well. And I know that you also have a sore throat as well. So you have a microphone as well. Thank you for doing this as part of the book tour.
Yes.
As well. So I did use the bio from the book that I kind of edited just a little bit. Can I intro you? Is that okay?
Yes.
All right, excellent. So many of you already know Siri, but Siri Chilazi is a senior researcher at the Women in Public Public Policy program at Harvard Kennedy, and internationally recognized as an expert in advancing women and promoting gender in organizations. You're an academic researcher, so you're right now you're doing research in these areas, and your specialty is identifying practical approaches to close gender gaps at work by debiasing structures and designing fairer processes. Your work has appeared in I'm telling you like you don't know this. Siri's work has appeared in the BBC, Fast Company, Forbes, Harvard Business Review, in the New York Times. You spoke at 100 events, now it's 101 tonight as well. So education, you've got a streak going. So MBA, Harvard Business, Master's in Public Policy, Harvard Kennedy, and a BA in Chemistry and Physics, double major.
Yes.
A double major from Harvard College. And you have a side gig. So not only are you an academic, but you also are an award-winning fitness instructor, presenter, and educator as well. In the book, Make Work Fair, which is in the back, and many of you have got now signed copies of it. It hit the shelves a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
Excellent. And so come up, let's have a round of applause. And structure for today, let's make sure that, is that
Are
on
we,
yet?
are we in business?
Let me pull a switch here and then we get that.
Thank you.
So,
That's how tech savvy I am, everybody. Great to see you. Thank you for coming.
so structure for today, we're going to talk a little bit. And then we're also going to crowdsource as well. So we have some questions that we want to understand from you all as you're thinking about it, and then we'll open up for questions. The only thing that I will ask is if you do have a question or a comment, is let me give you the microphone if it's the right time. I may hold you off if we're in the flow, so that we can get it on streaming as well. So Siri, thank you for coming.
Truly my pleasure.
This was how many book tour stops are we so far? So this is
stop number 2 outside of Boston, which is where I'm based. Hello, everybody also joining on Zoom. Thank you for being here virtually with us tonight. And thank you so much to everybody who's here in person. So yes, after our hometown of Boston, New York is the first stop. So I couldn't be more thrilled to be here.
excellent. As a Bostonian, I'm in on this too. Yeah, South Shore.
Oh, nice.
We'll talk about that later. Okay. Well, like, oh no, the South Shore is not Boston. I understand. So can you tell us your story a little bit? How did you get to the place that you are right now? What's the backstory to your journey?
So I was a science geek growing up, math, chemistry, physics, majored in that in college. My mom would say that I was a feminist emerging out of the womb. It just always was so not understandable to me that all humans are equal and yet they would be treated differently in the world and at work and would have different opportunities. But none of that really hit me until I entered the workforce. So when I graduated from college and started my first time job in management consulting, that's actually the first time that I came face to face with all of those inequities and instances of unfairness that I had previously only read about and heard about.
Okay.
In movies, in articles. So 50% women and men at the entry level, only 10% of partners in that firm were women. Rampant pay inequity, women getting promoted faster than average was used as an excuse not to pay them fairly compared to the men who were at their level, including yours truly. Sexual harassment, really bad misconduct being overlooked because the people perpetrating that were the rainmaker partners who were bringing in a lot of money. And so that was really what galvanized for me the desire to make this my life's work, because that was back in 2010 and it just hit me, well, this problem is not fixed. The work is not done. So that's what brought me here.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for sharing that. So today, can you describe a little bit about what your academic research is? And you have a co-author
Yes.
as well. Do you work on the same projects, the discrete projects? How did this this work come about?
Yeah. So my co-author is the brilliant Iris Bohnet, who wishes that she could have been here this evening. We both are, Iris is actually a behavioral economist specifically. I'm a behavioral scientist by background. We both study how to make organizations more fair through changing the structures and processes and systems that we've built in our organizations. So think how we hire, how we promote, how we evaluate performance, how we allocate work, even things like how we run our meetings, how we conduct diversity training or not. We can talk about that. There's a lot to talk there. So there's historically been a lot of really important research that has kind of identified what the problems are. So we know exactly how the playing field is on level for different groups of people. Our focus is on figuring out what works to level the playing field and close those gaps that are very well documented, which is exciting because the reality is there's a lot of research now that tells us what works and what doesn't. So the thing that's holding us back is just going out there and do it. We know what to do.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. No, I mean, yeah, I'm certainly aware, and I think if you've come here, you may have many perspectives on what's going on in the world today, particularly in the United States, but even around the world, there are different views. If you were to take apart what you're hearing in the press or in the kind of the society in general about words that I actually don't think in working through your book that while DEI is certainly an aspect, it has some aspects of fairness to it. It's not necessarily what that is. What is the dialogue like right now for you when you're traveling, you're speaking to folks about some of these issues? Since you brought up what's working and what's not working as well. What's the correction? What are we getting right? What are we getting wrong right now?
Yeah. I think you all could tell me, tell us collectively even better what the mood is because you're even closer to it on the ground than I am. So I'm actually really excited to get into this in the Q&A. I think it's a moment of a lot of uncertainty, some fear and anxiety that I'm hearing from practitioners. People are wondering about how to continue the work of fairness in a way that doesn't single them out from a legal standpoint, in a way that doesn't single them out from a public relations standpoint. I do see a lot of ongoing commitment to continuing to promote fairness, whatever that looks like. What I think from where I sit is as much uncertainty as there is right now, I actually see this as a moment of great opportunity because the reality is that the evidence shows that a lot of the practices that we've devoted enormous amounts of time, money, and attention and goodwill to over the last 5 to 10 years, while often well-intentioned, have not worked. They haven't moved the needle commensurately to the amount of effort that has gone in. And the reason for that is that as much as many of these practices were well-intentioned, they aren't backed up by evidence. Let's take diversity training or unconscious bias training as just one example. These trainings have actually been around since the 1960s when they were first introduced as a result of the civil rights movement. And we've been studying them since then. So we've got 60 years worth of hundreds of studies that show that trainings do not result in behavior change. Yes, if you survey people right after they walk out of a training, they'll tell you that they learned something. They might give the training a 10 out of 10 because they enjoyed it. They might even express an increased commitment to tackle discrimination or unconscious bias in the workplace. But then when you follow them up 6 months later, or 12 or 18 months later, and see if any concrete behaviors have changed, they just haven't. And we know this for a while. And in fact, those of us in academia have been trying to tell organizations this for a while. But trainings are they're compelling for some other reasons outside of effectiveness, right? It's a neat check the box thing to signal that you're doing something, that you care. You can report lovely metrics like 99% of our employees are trained. Now, did that result in anything else? Okay, fine, but you've got a metric there that you can report. So I do understand why organizations gravitate to these types of programmatic solutions. But I think what we have an opportunity for in this moment is to shift from those things that haven't worked to strategies that are embedded into how we do our work every day. And those are exactly the strategies that research shows will move the needle a lot. And that's what making work fair is about at its core.
You know, it's funny you say that. One of my favorite talent development people once said to me, you know, there is a learning curve. And the moment after someone has an intervention, I've learned the forgetting curve then. That's the most generous interpretation, right, of that word. Is that they actually did absorb it and it's there and then immediately forgotten too. So do you have a real example of where the data has shown that by making some adjustment, fairness, and whatever that definition is, we're going to ask you in a moment what your definition is for it too. But do you have an example that you've been relying on lately of what does work?
Yeah, let me share one recent study that's I have so many favorites, but this is one of them. This is a study that looked at more than 9,000 firms hiring for hundreds of positions in the UK. And it specifically looked at the resume, which I'm assuming everyone in the room has. You've used it. Now, the traditional resume format, of course, lists your work experience with the associated dates. So management consultant, 2010 to 2013, right? What does this format do? Well, it does many things. One thing that it makes really salient and obvious is if someone has a non-continuous work history, if they have gaps in their work history for any reason, because you were a management consultant until 2013, and then your next experience starts in 2016. What was going on in those 3 years? We empirically also know that employers tend to penalize candidates with career gaps, even though there's actually no evidence to suggest that people with career gaps are any less committed or any less capable. So in this study, they tested a redesign of the resume, which expressed past experience with the amount of time instead of specific dates attached. So think management consultant, 3 years, academic researcher, 10 years. And all this redesign does is you don't really lose any information, but you now obscure the career gaps. What they found was that both women and men were 15% more likely to get invited to an interview. Because by focusing on the actual skills that people brought to the table, instead of getting distracted by career gaps, employers were able to make better matches between candidates and the positions that they had. So I love this example for many reasons. One is the change is so small, right? We just went from years to amount of time. It doesn't cost any money to do. The other reason I love this example is that reminds us of something really important, which is no design is neutral. Just because we've structured work a certain way today doesn't mean that it is the only way or the best way or the fairest way. So today's resume format disadvantages people with career gaps, but by making a small change to the format, we could level the playing.
And that was true. The 15% is true regardless of race, gender.
Controlling for demographic characteristic, controlling for amount of work history also, and controlling for the type of jobs. The jobs in the study ranged from customer service as call center operators, care workers, to high finance and software engineers.
Okay, so I mean, it certainly follows a lot of great research done. I mean, there's of course the orchestral blinded study that I think many of you have actually used in some of the books that you've all written. Some even the audience has written books by the way, as well on these topics. Where if you're working on blind additions, the selection becomes a lot it becomes different than when it's not blinded. As well. So it's kind of pulling in that same thread. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So, you know, one of the things that we would like to invite you to do is Stella has put up on the screen a series of questions. We've got a QR code and Slido. We're going to invite you to kind of provide your feedback on what you think this is as well. So we're going to take a moment to kind of get your view, and then we're going to talk about that together. And maybe we'll kind of put piece those things as you are writing your own views on this. I guess Siri, one of the questions that I kind of was thinking through is, as you think about this experience globally, how do people take up this idea of fairness in companies at a global level? Are you seeing regional differences? Are you seeing different cultural differences inside of South American versus European versus African areas? Like what have you noticed?
It's a great question. Fairness as a concept turns out to be a really universal human value. So studies have been done around the world to show that around age 4 and 5, kids become really sensitive to fairness. They react very strongly to displays of unfairness. One study that I just love is you've got these 5-year-old kids and they get an odd number of marshmallows to distribute between two peers, two fellow kids who have cleaned their rooms. And they are told that these two kids did an equally good job at cleaning their room. These kids will throw out one marshmallow so that they can distribute an equal number of marshmallows between the two other kids. Because since they did the same work and they did it equally well, it would be so unfair to give one more marshmallows than the other, right? So this is just one example of how universal and kind of deep the concept of fairness is. However, there are regional differences, for example, in how people tolerate income inequality. So in countries like the US, people are much more comfortable with a higher dispersion of salaries from the entry level to the CEO of an organization compared to other countries. And there's a lot of hypotheses historically and stuff for why that is. But one other thing I want to say about regional variation in the current moment in particular is it's important to remember the climate we have in the US right now and the headwinds and the backlash that we're seeing against DEI as a concept, that's just here. In Europe, for example, companies are moving full steam ahead. The European Union is really progressive and world leading in the regulation that it's putting in around gender quotas on corporate boards, gender pay gap reporting mandates, and various other things. So we're not representative of what's going on in the world.
Now, I mean, it's interesting is that as we talk about what's going on in the US, are there, when you mention opportunity, are there areas that you would like to see us reconsider in the US that maybe Europe isn't thinking about right now? So as we think about what's working, what's not working, as well as is that thoughtfulness? You call it an opportunity. What is that thoughtfulness? And if you had a hope, what does that result in?
Yeah. Fair. We make fairness an inextricable part of all the things that we're already doing. So once you think about your own job, from not even your organization, but your job, one of the things that you're doing on a daily basis, you might be sitting in meetings, you might be writing in emails, you might have direct reports and you're coaching them, you're evaluating their performance, you're giving them feedback. You might be developing new products. You might be participating in strategic planning for your division or for your unit. You might be hiring new team members, right? So all of these activities, these are the processes that we need to tweak in small ways, just like the resumes, to make them more objective and more fair. We don't need to take on a new training, participate in a group, go join a task force, right? Put all this new stuff on our plates. This is about doing what we're already doing, but making it slightly better. And if all of us did this, the collective impact would be that we would be living in organizations where people actually have an equal shot of success, which, by the way, is the definition of meritocracy. That's a word that's getting thrown around a lot these days. I love it. Meritocracy is defined as a system in which people advance or are given power according to their demonstrated abilities. I'm all for it. The only issue is that the evidence is overwhelming that we don't live in a meritocracy today. In fact, I would suggest that we've never yet seen a meritocracy in action. So while it remains a worthwhile ideal to strive for, that's not where we're starting from today.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you. So let's see what's going on here. So we can stand up and look at the okay. So the word cloud one, I see high dispersion. So of the words. So word clouds are not always the best for this, but at least gives us a good component. Right. So we see transparency in Siri, if there's anything kind of calls out to you. Perception of balanced opportunities. Not forcing
reduction of systematic bias. Rules apply equally, impartiality. Yeah, balanced opportunities.
Not forcing equity. Does anything resonate for you there? What does that mean to you? So like the equity word, certainly there are so many of there are many cartoons, right? The cartoon of folks trying to look over the fence. right? For those things too. In a perfect world, what is that? What does the E mean?
Yeah.
In a as we're rethinking reality today.
Yeah. So let me draw an analogy that might be helpful. I want you to imagine the 100-meter dash at the Olympics, and you've got two sprinters up the starting line, and they're about to run this 100-meter race, and they're equally fast. So who's going to finish first? Good question.
Hopefully the fastest runner.
And if they're equally as fast,
All equally as fast, better shoes. I'm a runner, by the way. The carbon plating.
there's the runner.
Yeah.
So if they're equally fast, they're going to finish at the same time, right? Right? That's not what the workplace is like today. The evidence shows that I'm so happy to walk through some of these studies. What I mean by concretely when I say evidence is that actually a more accurate scenario is that one person's starting line is moved 20 meters. Now, a lot of the intervention that we've attempted aim to fix individuals by saying to that person who's 20 meters behind, let's give you a faster pair of shoes. Let me give you a different outfit that's more aerodynamic. Let's change your running technique so that you're moving your arms a little bit differently. And those interventions might make that person, call it 0.2 seconds faster. Are they ever going to make up for the fact that that person's starting line is 20 meters behind their competitor? No, they will not. So what if instead of trying to fix these sprinters and give them all this advice on how exactly to move their arms, what if we just said, nope, let's have you all start on the same starting line and then have you run as fast as you can and let's see who finishes first. That's fairness. And then to take this analogy even further, what if one person is running on the coated part of the track and we make the other sprinter next to them run in mud? One person, we make them run barefoot, whereas the other person gets Nike's newest sneakers. So part one is making sure that everyone starts at the same starting line, but then part two is making sure that they actually get to run the same race, that they get the same supports to succeed, which I see some of you nodding because I'm guessing you've also experienced in the workplace that this is often not the case. Not everyone actually gets the same resources, whether that's sponsorship, mentorship, access to the high visibility project, knowing senior leaders in the organization. One study that I did with, shall we say, Fortune 5 tech company, one of the dynamics we discovered was that folks who came in through the official recruiting process were disadvantaged in comparison to folks who knew people in the company on day zero, before they had even started. Because by day one, those connections had told them key information about here's the people you want to meet in your first week. Here's how you want to structure your time. Make sure to do this, make sure not to do that. They were giving these folks inside information about the unwritten rules and norms and how to navigate those in the organization. So already on day one, folks who had connections had a leg up. That's the support and resources that I'm talking.
Well, so, you know, the analytics world and the O&A work that many people do for organizational analysis, it's one of the best use cases for O&A is to help someone who's just starting an organization know who this first 10 people call really are, even if you don't know anyone. Or then try to get an O&A done in your organization. If you're working there, it's a little bit harder too. Could we pull the thread? You tell a story in the book about mentorship and how mentorship that mentorship might not actually act the way that we think it's acting, but more changing the mindset of the folks that are aware of the mentorship opportunities as well. It's kind of the earlier part of the book. Can you just tell a little bit of that story and what the evidence is on how mentorship goes right or depending on how you employ it?
Yeah. So the first thing I want to highlight is the distinction between mentorship and sponsorship. How many people are familiar with this? A lot of people are nodding. Just real quick to make sure I'm on the same page. Mentorship is informal advice and support that can be provided to you by anybody, person at any level inside your organization or outside. That's useful and valuable. Sponsorship, though, which is even more important and even more potent for career advancement, is concrete advocacy and support and opportunities that are channeled to you by people who are typically in your organization and at least a few levels senior, which means that they're in the rooms that you are not in, and they're able to advocate on your behalf, pound the table and say, no, I know Jeremy is ready. Let's put him on this project. like someone down your capacity. And research shows that women in particular are often over mentored but under sponsored, because sponsorship, those concrete opportunities are what really helps to accelerate people's careers.
Awesome, thank you, thanks for that. So we're ready, I think we're ready for one more Slido question. It will be a different QR code, I don't know why. Slido, you guys. Exactly, you know, it's all about cost savings nowadays. So this question, and I don't know if this is making me to zoom out, so if you were.
One of my favorite questions. I'm so excited to hear what you all have.
Zooming around.
Oh.
Slido. So this is about goals. So how would you define your goal of fairness in your organization?
Yeah. For those if you're not familiar, Dan Ariely has a new book coming out. He's another behavioral scientist. He talks about the goal of the goal. Meaning sometimes we are doing things, channeling activity and effort towards something that's not actually the ultimate thing we're trying to achieve.
Got it. So this is your version of that. So this book is just coming out. This is
What is the goal of the goal?
Well, let Siri have some water. Take a moment. Add your thoughts in. Equal opportunity, bragging rights. I do appreciate the perspective. Fair shot.
See a lot of equal opportunity, leveling the playing field.
Succession is always interesting.
Mhm.
And profitability.
Succession is often a hotspot for bias. The processes were we use to identify
Also, the process of identifying
Yeah.
successors.
and
top
picking
dogs,
people for
so
the high potential
Yeah.
track.
Have-
You know,
have
that
you-
folks who get-
Have you been able to get some candid conversations inside of large organizations on succession and how it actually looks?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's so much of it is there's so many biases that come into play. Recency bias, it's top of mind. You know? The other one is we often have an easier time spotting talent in the usual suspects, meaning people who either look like us who are familiar or people who look like all the ones that have gone before. I'm going to actually take us to a totally different context for a second to really make this point, which is the Broward County school district in Florida. It's the 6th largest school district in the country. There are more than 250,000 students in Broward County. And years ago, they had in place, they have a high potential program. This is kind of like Succession. And the way this program used to work is parents or teachers would have to refer first and second grade kids to get tested for intelligence, essentially. Kids would take this IQ test, and if they scored above a certain cutoff, they would then get placed into the gifted program, special classrooms, more advanced material, special stimulation, more one-on-one attention from teachers, and so forth. Not surprising that that would lead to better performance from those kids for years and years to come. So then the school district made a design choice and a design change that turned out to be life-changing for a lot of the students. They moved to universal screening of all second graders, which means every single kid by default in the whole school system will take the test. They did not change the test at all, and they did not change the score cutoffs at all. But what happened? The participation of Black kids and Latino kids went up 80% and 130% respectively, because those kids had been previously under-referred and the system had missed their giftedness. So the system redesigned uncovered all these students that actually were absolutely as gifted, but we had missed it before because parents weren't seeing it or didn't have the resources to advocate for their children, and teachers weren't seeing it. So we just simply as humans, I hate to say this, but it's the truth, we are not objective judges of talent. And we need to surround ourselves with smarter systems and more de-biased systems to help our inherently biased brains get it right.
Familiarity breeds liking, right? So
Familiarity breeds liking, absolutely.
Have you explored at all validated assessment? I mean, certainly validated assessments have been around as long as, well, some of these training programs from the sixties, right, as well, and actually some of the academic studies come from the same roots as well. How, every tool has its pros and cons. Do you have a view on where validated assessment comes in? Because I mean, certainly the Broward story is a story of a validated assessment.
Yeah.
Applied to the entire second grade.
Yeah. So the first question I would ask with a validated assessment is validated. Is it validated by the company that has created assessment and that sells the assessment? Or is it externally validated by academics, researchers, or other credible entities that don't have a financial stake in the performance of that assessment? If I were in the shoes of considering using an assessment, considering using my company's resources to purchase assessment, that's the first question that I would ask. And then secondly, whatever tools you're using now, test them yourself. Don't trust the validation, says the academic, right? Even practices that have been studied widely across the world, when companies say, should I do this? Is it going to work? My best answer is, well, based on extant research, we have a good reason to assume that it will work. Is it going to pan out the same way in your organization, in your context? Can't guarantee that. Let's measure, let's test, let's track the data to see how it performs. And if you see systematic performance differences between groups of employees on any kind of assessment instrument, including a validated test, that would be a reason to suspect the test and dig in deeper and understand. The problem is that a lot of these tests are black boxes. A lot of algorithms that we're using in hiring, for example, black boxes companies won't open to users or to researchers to actually investigate.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Years ago, we had Kathy O'Neill joined us, who wrote the book Math Destruction, and she was actually a quantitative trader by a quant designer. It's actually quite interesting because her theses for many of these areas were absolutely on par. With one exception, she actually wrote a chapter about validated assessment, which was about a friend of mine. She didn't know it was a friend of mine. And I actually knew the story behind that chapter. It turns out that the actual assessment was wrong of what was going on. But the idea behind that work is absolutely spot on. As we think about this, I'm going to flip to just two other concepts that are related to this board here. And then we'll open up to some Q&A. So someone wrote profitability. And I'm gonna just convert that for a moment to organizational success, because some of you work in not-for-profits. If you're a not-for-profit healthcare setting, profitability might not be your first. But let's, from an organizational success area, what's the most compelling evidence that you've seen that some of the ideas in the book, that fairness help to promote success in other ways? Like the actual, if you're a company, you're an organization, your job is to become successful in whatever your stakeholders are expecting as well. What have you seen? What have you noticed in that area?
Let me give you two examples. The first is actually a study of the US GDP development since the early 1960s. And researchers have found that 40% of the growth in US GDP per person in the last 60 years is attributable to better allocation of talent. So as an example, Sandra Day O'Connor, who went on to become the first female Supreme Court justice on the United States Supreme Court, she graduated from Stanford Law School in 1952. And the only job she could get was as a legal secretary, because she wasn't allowed to practice law, because law firms were allowed to discriminate against women and say only men can become lawyers here. So as we've dismantled those types of barriers and allowed talent of all backgrounds and shapes and sizes to come into the workplace and do their best work, we've expanded the pie for everybody. We've increased prosperity and economic returns for everybody in this whole country. So I think that's a beautiful example of how it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game, because when we expand the pie, we all win. Here's an organizational example of that. The European Central Bank in 2013 set voluntary goals for itself to increase the proportion of women in its management ranks to 30%. And to their credit, they partner with researchers before, during, and after the goals to actually collect the data on what happened. And what they found was that the women who were promoted after the goals had been set turned out to have better salary trajectories than the men that had been promoted before, during, and after the goals, which is evidence that the organization was missing out on talent before the goals, and to put it very bluntly, had been promoting mediocre men instead of more qualified. And I believe that organizations win when the right people, best people, are in the right roles at the right time doing their best work. And I think this is really the ultimate argument for fairness. And it connects to profitability, because let's say, you're working in a company and you think our ultimate goal here is to be profitable. I've talked to many senior leaders, and every last one of them says the biggest enabler of that success and the profitability is their people. It doesn't matter what you're selling, it doesn't matter what you're manufacturing or making, whether it's a product or a service, whether it's a widget or an iPhone. You need smart people doing good work to make that happen. And without fairness, we don't have the best people in the right places at the right time.
Is there across the streams to your work inside of fitness, the increased ability in sports, and particularly US sports today, where we're much more selective in an increased objective capacity? It's still not fully objective, but an increased. Is that the same mechanism of action? Is that the same kind of notion as we see better basketball players? So I am personally obsessed with cycling, right? And so what we're seeing around the world is greater and greater cyclists that are being identified earlier in their careers. There's a very talented woman, her name is Kristen Faulkner. Actually, she was the second in the south of Boston that just won an Olympic medal for road cycling. She was actually told by the U.S. Cycling Organization she should not race that race because their models uncovered that she would not be able to win based on the competition. And she said, "Look, I know my legs. I can win."
Yeah.
And she did, but it's actually one of the most spectacular parts of my view of the Olympics from last year too, was her win where she smoked the competition. But every year we're seeing this in so many different organizations of sports. Is that mechanism of action of that type of fairness of increasing the playing field, creating the type of work you're talking about here?
In benefiting from 100% of the talent.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's also what you're speaking to. We often limit the talent pool in very unintentional and very subtle ways. Gendered language in job advertisements. When job ads use words that in our cultural context are associated with men, words like agentic, leader, strong, assertive, ambitious, ninja, actually those job ads disproportionately attract men to apply. And I don't think that's a conscious effect in most cases. But on the flip side, job ads that contain disproportionately feminine coded or female coded language, who can tell me what that would be? You don't have to be a researcher to know this. You just have to live in the world that we live in. Collaborative. Yes. What else? Supportive, warm, nurturing, caring, kind. When you put all that in your job ads, you're going to disproportionately attract women to apply unconsciously. So super low hanging fruit. Either balance out the gendered words that you're using or steer clear of explicitly gendered words entirely. There's software out there that will do this automatically. The research papers that have documented which words are masculine and feminine stereotypes are all out in the
Sure.
public domain.
I mean, all the data science, the work on that is fantastic, right? So Kieran Snyder found the TextDO and now has handed up. What's the name of the New York-based Miriam used to still works there? People data. Very similar ways too. So that's solidly in the people analytics territory.
So this is small and subtle,
Yeah.
but it can have enormous differences or impacts in who we're getting into our talent pool. Not to mention, are we able to do justice to their talents once we value them?
Thank you for that. Okay, so one final question for you, and then we'll open it up. So one of the things that this is working on. One note was allowing different viewpoints. So I'm going to reinterpret that just slightly to psychological safety. Certainly something that has made its way through corporate ranks heavily. And there seems to be a fair amount of evidence that psychological safety in all ways increases organizational performance. Right, wrong, what have you found?
Yes.
And where do people who have learned that maybe gone the wrong way in trying to enable organization? Maybe there's a better way.
generally on point that psychological safety increases all the wonderful things, including employee satisfaction, retention. Although we have to caveat that psychological safety is often a slightly misunderstood concept. A lot of people have misunderstood it to mean that I can say anything with no consequence, and people must always follow what I say. And that's actually not psychological safety. The real proper definition of psychological safety, as my colleague Amy Edmondson of Harvard Business School, who launched this term, describes, is that you do not have to fear negative interpersonal consequences for raising perspectives or opinions that are not the majority opinion. In other words, going against them. So if you're a nurse in the operating room, and you of course are in that context lower status than the doctor, but you see that the doctor is making a mistake. If this is an environment of psychological safety, you feel empowered, and actually, you feel like there's an expectation on you to say, excuse me, doctor, I think you should be doing X, Y, and Z. And you can be sure that the doctor isn't going to yell at you, or that you aren't going to get fired or socially ostracized. So I want to share with you one study from Novartis, a global pharma company based in Switzerland, of what this can look like in practice. They wanted to increase psychological safety and employees' self-perceived inclusion, and they decided to tackle one-on-one meetings that managers have with their direct reports, because this is, again, something that's already happening in the organization anyway, no matter what. They wanted to do it slightly better. And they tested various different nudges for managers to focus on different things in these meetings. It turns out there was one way of conducting the meetings that was far and away the most effective at increasing psychological safety. And it was asking the managers to talk less, listen more, and hand over control of the meeting to their employee and say, I'm here for you, to help you. What's going on with you? How can I assist? How can I clear hurdles from your path so that you can do your best work?
Interesting. So allow the employee or if they're the less dominant to set the agenda.
Yeah. And as a matter of fact, it also ended up increasing not just psychological safety and belonging, but the frequency of the meetings, which is really interesting. Because presumably both employees and managers actually enjoyed it and felt like it was a value add. They were willing to invest more time in those meetings.
So this is to everyone listening or not. I've held for 10 years to find a specific paper. I remember reading it because the title of the paper is so memorable, and I cannot find it. And it was something to the effect of ordinary nurses save lives. And it was basically, it was the story you basically just told, that inside of a surgical theater, inside of a clinical a healthcare setting, the staff that is the most pivotal in saving and improving lives are the nurses that don't roll over when a very forceful physician may say, I need some deadly dose of a medicine and comes back and say, no, you realize you just gave them something else beforehand and are willing to push back and feel that way. We didn't have the language that for that psychological safety. But now we do.
Thanks to research.
Yes. If anyone knows that paper, please stop in. So as promised, we have a few minutes for questions. One thing I'll ask is one question per person, because I think you only have a different point of view. I've got another mic as well. So if you're in the room, you're interested, just kind of raise your hand up, and I'll kind of do my best to kind of shuffle around to you. Okay, thank you. And you would just kind of say your first name. Hold down. Cheers.
Revolves around industries or places that are less structured, and ways for lower employees or entry level employees to conduct themselves or ask for things or participate in a way that gives them more access to the context of employment.
Yeah.
Most things are often outside of an organization, or if you're in an organization, there's a lot of things that take place without structure. So I'm just curious.
It's a great question, because research shows really consistently that structure and formality in general is the enemy of bias, whereas ambiguity and informality and lack of structure is often the home of bias, both in decision making, but even in things like requests. I'm actually thinking, that makes me think of Walk Global Media, which is a small company based in Illinois. that went fully remote way before COVID, a decade before COVID, actually. And one of the things that they discovered was training employees to have more structure in their everyday communication and everyday work together was one of the critical success factors in moving to a work environment that wasn't focused on face-to-face surveillance, but instead focused on results. So as an example, instead of asking something like, "Oh, could you look into this for me?" Right? Making that ask more structured and saying, "Could you send me a 2-pager with this analysis by this date?" And that gives people, once you know what you're expected to produce and by when, you then have the freedom and flexibility to structure your own time, decide how urgent this is, and how you should balance this across your other work responsibilities. So it's really difficult to institute that kind of culture shift as the most junior employee. But, and I can share the story of Roz Atkins in a moment if we have time, but there's a lot of great examples of how when you start to change how you work, that can have huge ripple effects for others. So for example, if you get those unstructured requests, just say, "Hey, can I just ask, what exactly are you envisioning? And when do you need this by?" That can start to change how people communicate back to you too.
Awesome, thank you. Another question? Okay, we'll go here and back.
Elizabeth, and thank you. This has been really wonderful and really interesting. Siri, if as a result of this book, you could hope to change one or more things that organizations actually do,
Yeah.
moving forward, what would those be?
That's a great question. I think the first is less talk and more action. So people are really concerned about this DEI going away and all this stuff. I'm more concerned about what's actually happening. We can get a lot of results and a lot of progress done by communicating about it less, having fewer programs, and instead just tweaking hiring, tweaking performance evaluations, really embedding these small systemic changes into our everyday work. So that's one of my hopes, is that we move the whole concept of DEI or fairness or whatever we want to call it from an off to the side program over here to actually being part of our core business. Other reason why that's important is that's recession proof, it's politics proof, it's backlash proof. Because an individual program can get cut, either because the president says so, or because budgets are tight, or whatever else is going on. But are companies going to stop hiring? Are they going to stop having meetings? Are they going to stop developing new products? No, they're not, because that's essential to survival. So if we're just doing those things better, then we're actually reaching some real results. So I think that would be my number one hope. Thank you for that question.
Awesome, thank you. We'll go over to Ivy.
Hello, Ivy. And I work at the people analytics at a tech company. I really love all your stories and the examples that you give. So my questions actually sort of came from one of the I read up from my company last week. It's online. So basically the comment goes, how do you prove that a DI is working? And then someone else commented that it's the leader's role or their responsibility to prove that it is working. Like you can't just say it's not working. So then my question is, you mentioned that all the systematic small changes that you can make for like culture-wise, and I feel like that's really hard to measure. So for example, if you implement a program or training, then you can for sure say like 90%, like completed the survey. But then for these small changes, how do you prove that it's actually working for a company? I like all the examples, and I think it's actually gonna make a difference. The thing is, tell the leaders, or I want to prove it to them, have them buy in. Do you have any examples on that?
It's an excellent question, and I think it's sometimes funny to notice how leaders ask for data very selectively. So they're willing to do certain things without any data, purely on ideology. One example is how a lot of CEOs are claiming that their workforce is more productive when working in the office. There's absolutely very little data. There's actually no evidence to suggest that people are more productive in the office, and more fundamentally, the productivity of knowledge workers is really difficult to measure. the world's sharpest minds, colleagues of mine, have been at work on this for decades. And aside from factory settings where productivity is more straightforward to measure, they haven't figured out how to truly measure the productivity of knowledge workers. So a lot of this is really ideological. Anyway, that's a bit of an aside. Coming back to your question, I do think that more things than we realize are measurable. So, for example, expanding the talent pool, right? When we change the format of the resume, we get more applications. We're able to get more talent in the door. Things like looking at people's promotion rates, tenure at a given rank before you get promoted. Are there differences in that between different groups? Performance evaluations, we can look at the actual scores. If there's a verbal component to performance evaluations, we can run that text through, for example, Textio's language analyzer to see if women and men or white people, people of color, older employees, younger employees are described using different words and if there's systematic differences. Then, of course, there's more subjective measures like employee self-reported job satisfaction, intention to leave, sense of belonging or inclusion. So, I mean, there's actually more metrics than we can collect, I think, than most workplaces are collecting today. The question still remains, what's the goal of the goal? So what are we ultimately trying to achieve? Are we trying to increase retention? Are we trying to increase self-reported belonging? Just give you one example. Fortune 500 CEOs, 11.6% of them are women. So there's a huge representation gap there. So I think the first thing we need is we need more balanced representation on Fortune 500 CEOs. But among the CEOs that are already there, the average tenure of men is nearly double that of women. Your average male Fortune 500 CEO is in their role for about 7.5 years, and your average woman, 4.5. So that tells me that these CEOs are not encountering a level playing field in their jobs. Somehow the female CEOs are getting less support. They're being treated in a more biased way by internal stakeholders, perhaps their boards, perhaps external shareholders, right? So that's an example of a data-driven, data revealing a disparity that we can then start to uncover. First, we need to understand exactly what's driving it, and then we can tackle those drivers.
So we have time for 2 more questions. We're going to go back here. We'll get them on board. I'll do that later.
With not a lot of data showing, productivity with in the office 5 days a week, why, investment banks, the JP Morgans, you hear this story, why are they pushing your opinion about that kind of thing?
There's no large scale research that would have been done on this because both the large scale phenomenon of remote work, the way we're experiencing COVID, is new, and then sort of coming back from that is really new. But I think one important factor that's at play is that managing people remotely or in a hybrid environment is totally different from managing them in person. And managers were trained and were comfortable managing people in person up until COVID. And then overnight, they were thrust into this totally different environment that demanded not only different skills and competencies, but also, frankly, adjustments to common processes, right? How do we communicate? What are expectations of availability? What are expectations of responsiveness? All of these norms that had been set in an in-person environment need to be adapted to a hybrid. So what we see consistently in studies around the world, including in places like China and Bangladesh, and of course the US, is that employees like remote work more than managers. And when given the choice, managers self-select into remote work less than their employees, their direct reports. So there is an element of adjustment can be through formal training. It can be through kind of work groups getting together and renegotiating the norms. It can be through organizations tweaking some of their processes around things like communication and performance evaluation. But we have to help managers be successful at managing a remote or hybrid workforce. And because we're not doing that, companies are just saying, oh, everybody come back. Because that's easier.
Something editorial on that is if you look at the Venn diagram of what great hybrid management looks like and what exceptional leadership looks like, it's really, really close. And the data is very, very close to it. Exceptional leaders can manage hybrid workers.
Yeah.
Average managers
Yeah.
struggle a little bit more.
And most managers are not naturally exceptional,
Yes,
right?
yes. Although, I
Um,
don't know if you believe this, but my belief is that there is no bell curve for management capability.
Say more.
So there is no reason why every manager can't be an exceptional manager. That is not it's not people's heights.
Yeah.
Follow the bell curve. Your ability to manage others and have them, that's not a bell curve, that's effort.
Yeah, but exactly. It takes effort though, on behalf of the company and of course on behalf of the managers themselves. Yes.
All right, last question. We'll do, let's,
I just want to say that a lot of that stuff that you're discussing. came from that conference, right?
Yeah.
The phrase, Orders have to say when they want to attract and retain this competition. they're gonna offer
But I have so many posts that are forced to go back.
It's like, it's a old market. So.
just break for a second.
Texas, the JP Morgans.
Yeah.
They don't have control like the tomorrow.
Yeah.
Let me, just want to break for a second, where this is, where you, there's a side conversation that came here too, so. So we'll definitely get to that, let's do it right after the break. So we have one more, we take one more question.
No one's asked a really controversial question yet.
I don't have a controversial question, sorry. I'm curious if an organization was trying to undergo like a cultural transformation. Do you think it's more effective for them to try and instill it from the top, like have the highest ranks set an example and that trickle down? Or is it more effective to kind of try and cultivate a new culture with like new employees that you're bringing in? Or that generationally it will change?
Wonderful question. The answer is yes, and systems can change both in big top-down ways as well as small bottom-up ways. So thank you, Charlene, for providing the perfect segue for me to share as a closing anecdote here. The story of Roz Atkins that I promised earlier. Has anyone heard of Roz Atkins? Do you know who he is? He's a journalist at the BBC. He's sort of like the Anderson Cooper of the UK. He's been a career journalist for more than 20 years. And for many years, he hosted a nightly primetime news show on BBC World and BBC News. And Ross has always cared about gender equality. He also believes as a journalist that his journalism will be of the highest quality and highest impact when it's reflective of the world that he is reporting on. But he realized a few years ago that he actually had no way of telling if that was the case. He had no data on the people that he was featuring, for example, as expert contributors and guests on this nightly news show that he was hosting. So instead of waiting for HR people analytics to save the day, bless you all, he decided to generate the data himself. And he said to his team of like 3 or 5 other people, let's take 2 minutes after every night show and just count on a Post-it how many women and how many men did we feature on screen during this hour. So they counted for a month, they averaged out the results, and they were very shocked because they were at 39%, a lot lower than they had expected and anticipated. So they started by collecting the data to reveal what was going on. Step 2, they set themselves a goal of getting to 50-50 gender parity because that's roughly the world that they are reporting on. Within about 3-4 months, they had gotten there. So they were averaging 50% women and men on screen on a monthly basis, and then they kept it up for years. That's the I'm changing my own work and making my own work more fair within my sphere of control piece of the story. That's already amazing. But then what happened next is even more amazing, which is Roz started sharing his approach with other teams. Now he was not a senior leader, so he had zero power to compel anybody to do anything. He didn't have a budget available to incentivize anyone to do anything. But what he did instead was he tapped into the shared motivations of his fellow journalists, who he knew cared about the same things as he did. So he basically went in to offer them a tool and say, hey, my team and I figured out something that helps us create better journalism. I know you also care about representativeness. Maybe this will be useful for you as well. And he was smart and strategic in that he targeted teams first that were internally powerful, the biggest, most high profile programs with the most powerful presenters, because he knew that if he got some of those teams to join, that would send a real signal to other teams in the organization. This went on for 2 years, fully grassroots, with hundreds of teams joining, until then it eventually caught the attention of the BBC senior management. And a few years later, the Director General said, I'm putting my stamp of approval behind this program. I am encouraging all teams in the BBC globally to join and adopt this methodology. And then it skyrocketed from there to more than 750 content creating teams becoming part of this project, which is now known as 50/50 the Play Project. So I think that's a lovely example of how the grassroots individual level action can spark really a revolution, actually, a global revolution. And then how the top-down leadership approach can help to turbocharge it and give it the credibility that allows it to exponentially take off in a way that a fully grassroots approach may not be able to.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that story. So one, thank you, Siri. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Jared.
Oh, thank you for hanging with the questions too. By the way, we've rehearsed almost nothing that we just talked about as well. So that this was a fantastic. Hopefully you felt the same way. Fantastic conversation. So after this, one, thank you to Peter and the whole Vimo team again for sponsorship.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much.
We have the room for a few more minutes, like 8:30, 8:45. So if you haven't gotten the book and had it signed, I think you'll be willing. You've got the Sharpie out for
Sharpie's ready to go.
for signing. Please take this as an opportunity to network, get to know someone that you've never met before. If you are the talent marketplace notion is going to be by the coats. And thank you for joining us today. I think we're going to have, Stella, three or four events this year. We're planning right now for May, June, in July, September, and maybe in December too. Typically in December, libations involved. Which you needed at that point. So thanks again for coming and wishing everyone a great night.
Thank